A spring onion or green onion variety that's mellow in flavor and one of the easiest to grow. Let's look at growing the crystal white wax onion. So here are our seeds for this onion variety, and the reason they're called spring onions is because we usually plant them in fall for a spring harvest. So as you can see here, we have sowed our seedlings in the seed starting container, and by September the seedlings should have grown large enough that they are ready for transplanting onto raised beds or containers. So around mid-September, what we can do is we can look at our plants, and if they're healthy enough, if they've grown to about this size that you see here, it's ready to be transplanted. So let's transplant these onion seedlings onto raised beds. Now, if you want spring onions that are smaller in size, that have smaller bulbs, you need to plant them very close, about an inch away from each other. However, I'm going to be planting my spring onions about 3 to 4 inches apart, and the reason for doing that is I'm not only going to use these onions as spring onions, I'm going to let some of these bulbs mature into bigger onions, and if I can get slightly bigger onions from some of these plants, I can use these onions just like regular onions as well. Now, how does a spring onion or green onion differ from a regular onion? Well, it's the same plant. The only reason we call them spring onions in some countries and green onions in some countries is that these onions are usually eaten before they reach full maturity. So they have smaller bulbs, or rather they're harvested when they have smaller bulbs, and they're usually eaten whole, the onion bulb, the stem, and the leaves as well. So these onions, these spring onions, have a more mellow flavor. They are a lot milder than regular onions, and that is why these onions are called spring onions, just because of the way they are harvested and eaten. And the name spring comes from the fact that these onions are usually harvested during springtime. So as you can see here, these onions that we are planting will grow through late fall, which is the months of October, November and December, and that's the time they will be ready for harvest. And it usually takes about 60 to 90 days for this onion variety to mature. Now I've mixed in a lot of compost and some organic fertilizer into the soil, and that should be enough nutrition till these onion seedlings grow a little larger. So what you need to do is add this kind of a fertilizer during planting and then wait for about 2 months. And here in the month of December, you can see that the onion seedlings have now grown pretty large, and this is a time when you need to start adding fertilizer. I prefer using a liquid fertilizer every 3 weeks. I use a fish and seaweed emulsion mix that I use, and it works great for these onion plants. You have a lot of options though. You can use a vegetable fertilizer, just use any fertilizer that's meant for tomatoes or peppers. They work great for onions. And you can even use slow release fertilizers, which you can apply every 3 to 4 weeks. Now here you can see that in the month of December, late December, the onion seedlings are almost ready for harvest. You can actually start harvesting them anytime you want. And in February, you can see that these onions have grown large enough to be harvested and eaten as spring onions or green onions. And they won't have large bulbs. That's not the idea of growing these onions. These onions are grown so that they can form smaller bulbs, but are very delicious when eaten raw. You can eat the bulbs, you can eat the stems, you can even chop the leaves, eat them raw, you can add them to stir fries. That's the whole idea of growing spring onions. And if you leave these onions to mature for a longer time, they can still be eaten. Their bulbs will be a little larger than what you see here. So let's go ahead and harvest a couple more of these onion variety. And here you can see that the bulbs have started growing larger, and each month that you wait into spring, these bulbs will keep getting larger. So you can not only use these onions as spring onions, you can just eat them as regular onions, and they have a very nice mellow flavor to them. So as you can see, very easy to grow in your home garden. Now sometimes you might see that when you're growing your onions, the temperatures go up and the onion plant sends out these scapes or these flowers. What you can do is just snip these flowers off from the plant, and as a result what happens is that the plant concentrates its energy on producing bulbs rather than these flowers. And these scapes are perfectly edible. You can use them just like you would use spring or green onions. So if you love growing onions, do check out these two videos. The video on your left is about growing onions in raised beds, and the video on your right, growing onions in whiskey barrels. It saves you a lot of space and just goes to show how easy it is to grow onions in containers. I hope you liked today's episode. I'll see you again soon. Happy gardening.